Hi, my name is Meng. Welcome to section 56 of my SwiftUI course. This time we're going to learn about size classes and how to deal with screens that do not have rounded corners. Let's start with the course list. We're going to go to courselist.swift and I'm going to resume my preview. So let's make this smaller. And here you can see that the cards are rather large. So there are two ways to solve this layout issue. The first one is a little bit more complex. You can use a grid layout and you can stack, let's say, 2 or 3 items per row depending on the size of the screen. Now, the reason why I'm saying it's more complex is because SwiftUI does not have a way to create a grid layout in which, let's say, you have an array of 20 items and it's going to wrap and go to the next line. So instead of doing that, you would have to have an array of items inside each row and then another array of rows. And you can imagine that you'd have to rearrange your data, which is not ideal. So I'm going to keep this simple for now, and I'm going to use the wallet UI, which is really interesting in its own respect. Basically, instead of using a padding between each card, they're just going to stack up on top of each other, and you can barely see the title and the subtitle, and then the next card is going to start from here, and it's going to stack like a bunch of credit cards in a wallet. In order to achieve this, I'm gonna go to the course view right here, and where it says height of 280, I could be changing to 80. And now it's gonna look like a stack of credit cards. But I wanna be able to keep the old layout if the screen is small, such as an iPhone. There are two ways to go about this. The first one is to detect the screen width, and based on a certain width, we would show one layout or the other. And the second technique is called size classes. Now, if you go to the Apple's Human Interface Guidelines in Visual Design, Adaptivity, and Layout, you can learn all about the screen sizes and orientation. But more specifically, if you scroll down a little bit, there's a part called size classes. So basically what this is that we're going to have a collection of screen sizes based on the width or height, and there's just two categories. One is regular and the second one is compact. Regular is basically the iPad and compact is basically the iPhone, but there are a few exceptions. So first of all, in portrait mode, the height of the iPhone is actually regular. In landscape mode, the width of the iPhone is only regular if it's at the max resolution. In other words, the iPad is always regular. The iPhone is always compact, regular. But in landscape mode, only the max size will have the width as regular. Otherwise, it's going to be compact. As you can see here, let's say for the iPhone XS is compact in landscape mode. So that is the only confusing part about size classes. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's also another thing you need to know, which is when you use a slide over. So you can see here when you have a 2/3, this is going to be regular. When it's half, it's going to be compact, regular. And when it's 1/3, then this is compact, regular. So for the half and 1/3, you can basically think of these screens as the iPhone in portrait mode. This is confusing at first, but you will most likely get used to it in the long run. It's as if we had a magic number for the content area, and if we exceed that number, then the size class is going to become regular, meaning that you can add an extra menu or a side content so that we can utilize all the space available to us in the screen. So let's go back to Xcode, and I'm going to scroll back to the top, and I'm going to set the environment. So in the past, we've learned about environment object, and that's really good for app-wide data. But in this case, the environment is all about the predefined settings such as dark mode and size class. So we're gonna set at environment, parentheses, / dot horizontal size class, camel case, and make sure this is typed correctly because we don't have auto completion here. And we're gonna set a variable called horizontal size class. Now we're using horizontal because that's the width. We could have used vertical size class as well, which would be the height. So let's apply this as a condition. We're gonna scroll down a little bit to find, again, course view. And where it says frame height 80, which we just changed, we're gonna set a condition. So horizontal size class equal dot regular question mark 80, otherwise 280. Now we just need to add the self because we are inside the for each loop. So we're gonna try to resume this. So one thing you're gonna notice here is that size class does not work in the preview. You're gonna have to run on the iOS simulator in order to see the change. But first of all, we're gonna have to go to the scene delegate. So scroll up a little bit, scene delegate, and instead of going directly to home, we're gonna go to course list because course list is not accessible without the tab bar. And now I'm gonna go back to course list and I'm going to run it. Now, if you have slide over enable, you're gonna see that the height becomes 80 if the width is regular. And if I switch to half, then this is compact, therefore the height is 280 instead. Now we have the issue with the screen width, and that's because we're not using Geometry Reader, and so it does not auto-detect dynamically when there's a change to the screen width. So let's do that. I'm gonna go to the Z-stack, command click on the Z-stack, put that inside a V-stack, change the V-stack to Geometry Reader, and I'm gonna set the values to bounds in. As a result, I'm gonna have to use self everywhere, which is a good practice again. And now where it says frame screen width, I'm going to use bounds.size.width. There are two more screen width that we're using. The first one is by setting the card width. We're using the screen width minus 60, so 30 on each side by centering. And obviously this is not good for adaptiveness. So bounds.size.width. And secondly, when we do the offset animation, when we click on this and it goes to the outside of the screen, we're using screen width, again, not dynamic, so we can use bounds.size.width. All right, so let's test this again. Command R. So now the screen adapts perfectly as we change. And when we go to a regular size, then it switched to the 80 of height. Now let's deal with the next issue. So when I go to full screen mode, you can see that I'm not respecting the content width of 712. So I'm going to find the frame that says max width, and instead of infinity, I'm going to set 712. And this is when it goes to full screen mode. Secondly, when it's not in full screen mode and I'm on the iPad, I want to set to a max width of 712. Otherwise, use the screen width minus 60. For this, I cannot really set a condition inside another condition. So what I can do is to create a function to take care of that. So I'm gonna go at the end and type func get card width parentheses. I'm going to receive a value called bounds, which is of type geometry proxy. And I'm going to return a CG float, curly braces. So first of all, I'm going to replace the bounds.size.width minus 60. I'm going to cut that and replace that with the function, which is going to return the CG float value. So get card width, and I'm passing the bounds that I'm receiving from the geometry reader. So from our function, let's return that value by default. Return and paste bounds.size.width minus 60. Now before returning, I'm going to set a condition. If bounds.size.width is bigger than 712, then I'm going to return 712 without the minus 60. So now if I test it, I have a width of 712 when it's not in full screen mode, and in full screen mode, it also gives me a max width of 712. And I can also test using slide over, and voila, it switches accordingly. Now the next thing I want to test is really important because not all devices have the notch or rounded corners, so it might look weird if it doesn't have that. First of all, I'm going to switch from the iPad Pro 11 inch to 9.7 inch. Then I'm going to run the app, and then I'm going to test this in landscape mode using slide over. Now there are two issues. One is the height of the card did not adapt. So you can see that the bottom is not being seen at all because I started from portrait mode and it was fixed. The second issue is when you go to full screen and your device does not have big rounded corners, then this might look a little bit weird. So let's go back to Xcode and let's command click on coarse view, jump to definition, and here we're gonna find the height of the card. So let's take a look at ZStack and double click on the curly brace. It's going to go to the end and you can find for the frame, if we are in full screen mode, it's taking the screen height, which is a fixed number and it should be dynamic. So we should use the geometry reader instead. Now I can wrap everything inside a geometry reader, but another thing I can do is to pass the value from the parent view. So let's do that. Let me switch to coarse view. And so I'm inside coarse view. I'm going to create a new variable. So var bounds, it's going to be of type geometry proxy. Then I need to make sure that this value is not empty. I'm gonna go ahead and find where the component has been called. Then I'm going to go ahead and add that missing value, which is bounds. And I'm going to pass bounds. So using that value, I'm gonna switch to coarse view. I'm gonna go to the end of the ZStack, so double click on the curly brace. I'm going to find the frame modifier, and instead of screen.height, I'm going to use bounds.size.height. So if we test this using Command R, we can see that we're missing a bit of a spacing, and that's the value of the status bar or the home indicator area. As we've learned in the past, Geometry Reader also provides the save area insets, so we can just do plus bounds.saveAreaInset.top, then plus bounds.saveAreaInset.bottom. If you run this, it should be working perfectly. There's no more spacing at the bottom. Next, we're gonna deal with the rounded corners. And so the rounded corners happens on the cover, but also the content area. So let me scroll a little bit to find clip shape. And here we have a clip shape. It's using a corner radius of 30. And basically what I wanna do here is to target only devices that have a small screen, so a small width, and screens that don't have a notch, meaning that they don't have the big rounded corners. Because that condition might be a little bit long and will be repeated in multiple places, I'm going to create a function. Let me just put it next to the other function, so get card width, and I'm going to create that right after. So func get card corner radius, parentheses. I'm going to use the bounds, which is a geometry proxy, and I'm going to return CG float. Here by default, I'm going to return 30, and then I'm going to set a condition. First of all, I want to see if the screen is small. So if bounds.size.width is less than 712, curly braces. And before the curly brace, I'm going to add another condition. So end bounds.saveAreaInsets.top is less than 44. Now this means that if the screen is not small and if the screen does not have a notch, which is why we have a 44 in terms of the status bar. So if that's the case, then I'm going to return 0 as a corner radius. And now I'm going to use that function. So let's switch back to coarse view, and I'm going to start with the content area. So you're going to see a bunch of text. So we're looking for the clip shape and it says 30. Instead of 30, we're going to type get card corner radius, and we're going to pass the bounds. Now I only want to remove the rounded corners if we are in full screen mode, which means that I'm going to have to add a condition. So show question mark, and then set that function. Otherwise set it to 30 when it's not in full screen. Let me copy all of this starting from show to 30, and I'm gonna find the other clip shape, which is right here, and I'm going to paste this over the 30. Now if you test this, you're gonna see that in full screen mode we do not have these rounded corners anymore, and the default card still has the rounded corners. And if we have a large screen, then we are keeping the rounded corners. So today we learned quite a bit about size classes. I think this is really useful information when you want to adapt for the iPad and for slide over. In the next session, we're going to learn how to adapt the home screen and how to fix the animation issues because of the scrolling and the save area. So I'll see you in the next session. Hey there, welcome to section 57 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to learn how to adapt the home screen, especially when it comes to organizing multiple screens on top of each other, how to deal with the save area, and how to fix extra unwanted animation from the scroll view. First of all, let's make sure we switch to the home.swift. So if you have the iPad Pro 9.7 inch selected and you scroll down, you're going to see that there's this little space here. Now we need to avoid using any of these extra padding manually. So for example, this padding from the top at 44, this will not translate well to a device without the notch. So we're going to remove this. And another thing we need to avoid, as we've learned before, is to not use edge ignoring save area on the actual view. It should be only done on the background. And the reason is that it can affect your content, such as this one, which is why we needed that extra padding in the first place. So if we remove this line and then we separate the background, so I'm gonna select the shadow and the background, and I'm going to cut it from the actual content. So Command X, and now all that remains is home view with all the animation modifiers. And now you can see that the spacing is correct and it adapts well to the iPhone 11 Pro with a notch. So if I switch, and it works perfectly without additional code, and that's the goal. Let me just remove this spacing and switch back to the iPad 9.7. Next, let's reapply the background that we cut. So I'm gonna put it right after color and paste it right here. Now I need to make sure to remove the background modifier, otherwise it's going to apply to this color, which is not what we want. So we're just going to remove background parentheses as well as the end parentheses and just keep the V stack. So now it's going to be its own view. Let me just fix the indentation using Control I. So to keep this clean, I'm going to create a component. So Command click on the V stack and extract subview. I'm going to name this one Home Background View. So because we have made a structural change, we're going to have to resume the preview. And now you can see that we can safely apply edge ignoring save area on the background. So edge.all. Remember, the reason why we applied all of these modifiers is for the menu animation, which is not accessible right now. So what we can do here is to switch to avatar view. And instead of setting it as unlogged by default, we're going to set it as logged so we can test that animation. Now I'm going to press on it and you can see it's applying the animation on the content, but not on the background. So let's switch back to the top. So home, and we're going to need to copy and paste the same animation properties to home background view before edges ignoring save area. So one important thing that I learned in SwiftUI is that you can have multiple modifiers, and especially for the animation, it's going to apply to all of the things before it. So let's say you want to animate the offset and the 3D rotation, but not the scale effect. You would put the animation before the scale effect. And so if you see that there are issues with your animation, especially when it comes to the save area, you can definitely separate the background from the actual content where you animate things. And also, I'm going to show you another issue. So when I finish, it starts to bounce a little bit at the end. So the reason for this is that we have this animation here that is applying to a scroll view because the content of this component has a scroll view. So therefore, this animation will be applied to the scroll view, which is what is causing that extra bounciness at the end. So the solution for this is to cut all of these animation modifiers And then I'm going to command click on home view component, jump to definition, and I'm going to find the scroll view, double click on the curly brace to find the end of that scroll view. And what I need to make sure is to apply all of that animation not on the scroll view or its container, but inside the scroll view. So right after frame. The only issue is that I'm missing a binding between the two views called view state. So let me go at the top and create a binding for that. So binding var view state of type CG size. And now because I have a binding, I need to make sure that I'm setting the previews correctly. So whatever is missing for the default value, I'm going to set to .constant.0. Next, if we scroll up a little bit, we're noticing that we're missing some self. So let's fix that. In 4 different places. One last thing we need to do, if we look at the error messages, it's going to ask us to go jump to the home.swift, and where we're calling the home view component, we're missing the binding for the view state. So let's do that. Comma, view state, $view state. So let's resume this. And by the way, sometimes you're gonna have a lot of code change and it can break your preview and you don't know why. One thing you can do is either to restart Xcode or Command Shift K to clean your build and Command B again, and then click resume. So let's test our animation, and you can see that when I go back, it doesn't bounce at the end anymore. And that really makes me happy. I've been looking for this answer for a while, and finally the answer is to not animate the scroll view. Another thing we'd like to fix is the rounded corners on the background, which does not look good if your device does not have rounded corners. So we're gonna go to the home background view, and here we need to make sure that we keep the rounded corners if we are showing the menu, but not when we're not showing the menu. So we're gonna create a binding first. So binding var show profile of type Boolean. Then I'm going to find the clip shape, and where it says 30, I'm going to ask, is show profile true? If yes, set it to 30, otherwise set it to 0. Now I just need to make sure that I bind show profile to this component. So let's jump to the error message. Here I'm going to fix the missing argument. I'm going to set show profile $show profile. After you resume this, you're going to see that by default we do not have the rounded corners, and when we animate the menu, then you're gonna see the rounded corners animated, and go back to corner radius 0. This will also fix for the iPhone 11 Pro when we click on the navigation. So remember before we had a little bit of a rounded corner here, so that's fixed now. I'm gonna switch back to the iPad 9.7, and now I want to fix the angle of the 3D transform because we see the shadows being cut off. So I'm going to change to homeview.swift. Then I'm going to find at the top where it says section view. So we set the angle multiplier to -20, and what we need to do is to make sure that for the iPad, the angle is less sharp. So let me create a function right next to preview. So I'm gonna switch to preview, and before the preview, I'm going to create a function. So func get angle multiplier, parentheses, I'm going to pass the bounds, which is from the geometry reader. It's going to allow me to detect the screen size. This is of type geometry proxy. And then I'm going to return a double value, curly braces. Double because that's the value type of the angle degrees. And then I'm going to set a condition. So if bounds.size.width, so basically if the screen width is bigger than 500 curly braces, return 80. And then we can set a default value by using the else statement, return 20. With this function, I can replace the angle multiplier of my section view. So where it says -20, I'm going to keep the minus and replace just the 20 and type get angle multiplier. I'm going to pass the bounds. If you resume the preview, you can see that the angle is much better for larger screens and we don't have that shadow cutoff issue anymore. Okay, so I just want to fix two last issues. We're going to switch to home.swift and we're going to set the max width for two places. One is the login and the second one is the menu. So here you can see it's too large. So let's go ahead and switch to menu view. I'm going to scroll a little bit to find max width infinity. Let's set it to 500 for max width. Then I'm going to switch to login view. And now what I want to make sure is that if the iPad is in landscape mode, then this form is not going to go all the way from the left to the right. So let's set a max width for that. I'm going to scroll a little bit. And I'm going to find where it says frame height 136, max width infinity. I'm going to replace infinity by 712. Okay, so one last thing I want to show you, if you go back to home.swift, when you click on update, you're going to find the navigation view UI. And by default for the iPad, it's this layout here with a menu on the left side. You can decide to not have this menu if you don't want to. So we're going to go to update list. Then I'm going to find navigation view, double click on the curly brace. And here at the very end of that curly brace, I'm going to add .navigation view style, stack navigation view style parentheses. So now if I go back to home.swift, you're gonna see that when I go to the updates list, it has the UI without the left menu. And this is fine as long as the container itself does not exceed, let's say, more than 712 in terms of width. So that's what I wanted to cover today. In the next session, we're going to bring the course list UI for these cards that are scrollable and animated to the home screen. And also I want to show you, if you want to use the tab bar, then how do we get the modals such as the login view and the content view to be on top of the tab bar? I think it's going to be really interesting, so I hope to see you in the next session. Welcome to another session of my SwiftUI course. This is number 58. Today we're going to learn how to have content on top of the tab bar. What I've shown you before is how to set tabbar.swift, and then we made the tab view to be at the root of everything. But the thing is, tab view does not have to be the root. So you can essentially have a Z-stack as a parent container and then put, let's say, a view after the tab view to be on top of the tab view content, which includes the home and the course list. And thankfully, we already have that structure in home.swift. But before we move on, I just want to explain two things. One, I know I've been repeating this a couple of times. The preview is not working because of the environment object, and anything that uses a component that depends on the environment object, such as the home, which includes the avatar view, then it's going to bug the preview. So to make it work, anytime that you call the view itself, let me just comment one of them. So we're going to keep the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and I have to include environment object bindable, and we're going to use user store parentheses. So this will fix the preview. And also, since Xcode 11.4.1, you don't need to add the edge ignoring save area anymore. So before we had this, which is causing the content to push beyond the save area, well, you can just comment this and it's going to fix your issue. Before we move on, I just want to show you the issue we're trying to fix. So on the content view, which is supposed to be a modal, well, you still see the tab bar on top of it. And the same happens for the menu view as well as the login screen. So let's fix that by going to home.swift. So here I'm going to scroll a little bit to find home view. I'm going to put this inside a tab view. So command click on it. Let's put it inside a VStack first. Instead of VStack, I'm going to put tab view. Then you can already see we have the tab bar. And then for home view, I'm going to add a new modifier, .tab item. I can remove the parentheses and then type curly braces. And here I'm going to customize my tab item with an icon and a text. So image parentheses system name using SF symbols, play.circle.fill, and then for the text parentheses quotes home. So now because the tab view is on the same level as menu view, you're going to see that when I go to the menu view, the UI is on top, and that's great. The same for the content view. So now it's completely hiding the tab bar. So if you were to use a tab bar, this is how you would structure it. And of course, I can add more tab items after home view. Now for this app, I'm not going to use the tab bar. So I'm going to comment tab view as well as the tab item. Next, what I want to do is to bring all the cards and the animation from courselist.swift and bring it to the home screen. First of all, I just want to make sure that my initial view is no longer course list. So I'm going to head over to scene delegate and I'm going to change from course list to home. Then I'm going to head over to home view. I'm going to find this portion with the title courses and with a card that does nothing right now. So let me just scroll down a little bit. You're going to find the H stack with the section view. Now I'm going to switch to courselist.swift and I'm going to find the for each. And from the for each, you're going to see when you double click on the curly brace. So I want to copy all of this content from the for each to the end of that curly brace. Copy and then go to home view.swift. And instead of the section view, including the offset, I'm going to select that and paste over. So it should look like this. Next, I want to make sure that I also move the states and variables. So let's head to course list again and scroll at the top. And we're going to copy all of these 5 lines and head back to home view and put that at the top right after binding view state. So if you resume your preview, you're going to see that it's all working and it has this beautiful card animation that we wanted. We just need to fix some layout issues. So let's scroll back to that content and I'm going to command click on for each and put that inside a VStack. This VStack is going to have a spacing of 30. Next, we're going to apply the same -60 offset to the Y position. So let's copy this modifier and apply that to the VStack. Remember that the reason that we did this was because the scroll view that is horizontal here was clipping the shadow. So we had to push the bottom content a little bit more. And so in order to make up for that push, we had to apply the -60 offset to the Y position. One thing we should add is also the blur animation that we had before. So we're going to need to add a blur modifier to the course's title as well as all of these elements here. So let's go to the title first. After offset, we're going to set .blur. And then using the radius, we're going to set self.active ? Set it to 20, otherwise 0. And then I'm going to copy this modifier so I can apply it to the scroll view as well, and the other scroll view. And finally, for the watching title with the avatar view. So now we can see that we have the blur applying when we are in full screen mode. Let me test this on the iPad 11-inch. I'm going to make this smaller and it's working really well. The only issue with this preview is that since we're using environment size class, it does not reflect correctly. So we're going to have to run the app and you're going to see that we're switching to this wallet UI instead. Before we finish this session, I just want to make sure that the colors that we're using here are not randomized. And also I want to add some extra spacing at the bottom because if we're using this wallet UI, then it's going to need some extra spacing. Let's start with the spacing. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit to find the for each for the cards. So here we have the for each, and right before the offset, I can just set .padding, set it to .bottom 300. Next, I'm going to switch to course store, and this is where we have the colors. So for the class course store, you're gonna find that we have let colors and set a bunch of colors using color literals. And for the items, we have the color value, which gives a randomized color. So instead of doing that, I'm going to create an index element, and then I'm going to increment it through the loop and then apply that to my array. Let me declare my index first. So right after let colors, var index is equal to 0 by default. And then inside my loop at the very end, I'm going to type index is equal to index plus 1. What this means is that this number is going to increment every single time at the end of the loop, right after we apply that index value to our array. So now instead of dot random element parentheses exclamation point, we're going to remove that, use square brackets, and put index inside. So what should happen is that our cards are going to use these colors and they're going to be ordered instead of randomized. Now, if you run the app, you're going to see that when we're hitting the API data, it's going to use those colors in the correct order. So that's it for today. In the next session, we're going to do a really cool one. A lot of people have been asking me, how do we make the content of the card scrollable? And that's exactly what we're going to learn in the next session. See you then. Hi, and welcome to section 59 of my SwiftUI course. Today we're going to do something really exciting, which is to make these cards scrollable. Now, I just want to point out that this interaction is complex on any platform, including prototyping tools, because of the amount of details, including the animation, the drag, the position of the scroll. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration, and we're trying to make something that is production ready, that can be published to the App Store. With that said, let's begin. First of all, I'm going to jump to the course list, which has all the main components of our cards, and then after that, we're going to apply it to the home. Now, remember that for each of these cards, what we're essentially doing is we're making it full screen using the geometry reader to position it. So the course view component basically controls the entire experience. Now we're going to jump to that component by clicking in the structure. So we're going to find course view and click on it. Then we're going to double click on the curly brace to go to the end. Then we're going to scroll back up a little bit to find the show condition. Now I just want to point out that we were on the right path. The idea is that when we tap on the card, then we're showing the component called course detail, which is the entire full screen experience. So let's uncomment this, and then we're going to play. So if you test this, you're going to see that the animation is wrong, but the content itself is scrollable. So one solution to fix this animation issue is to set a delay and only show after that delay. So we won't use the show boolean because that controls a bunch of animations and they have to be instant. What I'm going to do now is to click back to course view, so at the very top, and I'm going to create a new state. So state var is scrollable is equal to false by default. Now I'm going to jump to the untap gesture, which controls when the user taps on the card. And to find that gesture, I'm going to go to the Z stack, double click on the curly brace, and here you're going to find untap gesture. Let's add something at the end. So you're going to see that this is the end. So before that, we're going to type dispatch queue.main.async after with deadline dispatch time and execute. For dispatch time, we're going to type .now parentheses plus 0.7, which is in seconds. Then we're going to go to execute and press enter. For the code, we're going to set self.isScrollable is equal to true. This state is going to allow us to say, well, wait for the animation to be over first, so after 0.7 second, and then summon the full screen view. Now, we're going to scroll down a little bit to find if show, and instead of that, we're going to set if is scrollable, then show the new view. So let's resume this. Now we're going to tap on a card And you're going to see that the transition is pretty seamless and it's not perfect. So we're going to fix the details, but at least you can see that the content is scrollable and you can go back. But after you go back, you can see that the course detail view is still active, and that's because we haven't connected the close button from there. But first, let's fix the transition. So here you can see that at the beginning, there's a bit of a fade in, and that's because by default, when you use a condition, it's going to show a new view using a default fade in transition. And if you don't want that transition, you have to set .transition.identity. If you test again, you're going to see that there's no longer a fade in animation. Another thing that we're noticing is that there are a few small differences between the course detail view and the course view component when it comes to the background color from off-white to white, the spacing of the text, and also the positioning of the close button. And all of those details have to be perfectly in sync for this to work. Let's scroll up a little bit to find a bunch of text. This is where we're setting the content in the background, and then you're going to find the background modifier. Right now we're using background 2, which is off-white by default. So I'm going to change this to background 1 instead. This is definitely better. Now we just need to fix the content spacing and then connect the close button. So let me jump to course detail.swift. At the top, we're going to set a new binding. So binding var is scrollable of type Boolean. Then I need to set the defaults for the preview. So let me jump to the previews. And here we're going to fix it by inserting the missing argument is scrollable dot constant to true by default. Next, if we try to resume, it's going to give us an error because we called this component from course list. So we're going to jump right there. Let's add the binding. So click on fix. For is scrollable, it's going to be $ is scrollable. Perfect. So now let's jump back to course detail. And now we can connect to the close button. So let's scroll up a little bit to find X mark. Then for the close button, you're going to find on tap gesture. And at the end, we're going to set self.isScrollable is equal to false. By setting this binding is going to allow us to completely hide the course detail view when we click on the close button. Next, I'm going to fix the content spacing. So if you click on the text here, you can see that there's a bit of a spacing between the cover and the content. Let me scroll back at the very top to find the scroll view, and then the VStack that controls both the cover and the content. I just want to point out that the structure here in the course detail is slightly different from the structure of the component, which was using offset. And we did that to be able to animate smoothly from a small card. But here, as you can see, it's just content piling up, and this is much easier to add new content without having to worry about an offset. Now, the small issue that we have here is just that our VStack here has a spacing default of 16, so we're gonna have to set it to spacing 0. Great, we can finally head back to course list and then test our animation. So let's click on the first card, and if I click on the close button, you can see that it's really seamless and I can go back and forth. And on top of that, the content is scrollable. I wish we were done with this, but no, we actually have gestures going on. And if you try to do the gesture, you can see that it's not connected to the new state. So let's scroll up a little bit to find the gesture right before on tap gesture. And here we have the drag gesture. And for unended, if the user drags for more than 50, then we should set self.isScrollable is equal to false. Now this drag gesture happens in two places, one on the cover, but also on the content itself. So we're gonna need to do the same for the content. So let's scroll down to find the other gesture. For unended, we're gonna do the same. So self.isScrollable is equal to false. With this, we're gonna be able to drag and dismiss the full screen mode. Next, we have an issue where if you scroll down a little bit to the content, there's a bit of a gap for the gesture. So here I can drag and you can see that it's starting to animate a little bit. So what's happening here is that we are disabling the drag if it's more than 300, so you cannot go smaller than this or bigger than this, which is at the initial position. So for some reason, there's a gap between 0 and 50, which causes this little drag here. So to fix that, we can set the second guard to 50, and that should solve our issue. Next, we can fix the text animation and the close button. So for the text animation, we're going to scroll up a little bit to find all the text content here. And basically what we need to do, if we don't want the text to keep resizing, is to set .animation nil. And instead of doing that for each of these text elements, we can just do that before the padding, and it's going to apply all the children. So .animation nil. By doing this, you will see that the text remains intact during animation, but it also has its own flavor, meaning that the direction from which it comes from is slightly different. Next, let's fix the close button. And honestly, I'm not sure why there's a little bit of an offset going on here, but we can certainly fix the issue by using offset. We're going to find the V stack with an X mark, and this is where we can add an offset modifier, so .offset, and we can set it to X to 2, Y to -2. Next, I just want to point out that because we're using the delay technique and we're showing a new view using a condition, well, the drag will not work properly during that 0.7 second. So let's see here. If I click and really fast I try to drag, you're going to see that it's not going to change my scrollable state. So the solution is to disable all interactions during that 0.7 seconds. And this is normal behavior, by the way. If you go to the App Store on the Today tab, their interaction also is not interruptible. Of course, I wish this could be interruptible, but because of the technique that we're using right now, we cannot do that. So to disable the interactions, let me go to the course view component first. And then I'm going to find the Z stack. I'm going to double click on the curly brace to find the end of the Z stack. And there's a really neat modifier called disable. And it's using a Boolean. If you set it to true, then the element itself is not going to be draggable, tappable, etc. The condition that we're going to use is going to be, first of all, if it's active, meaning when the user has tapped. And secondly, so an end, if it's not scrollable yet. So exclamation point for not is scrollable, question mark, true, otherwise false. Now I just realized that we have to set this disable after the gesture, otherwise the gesture is not going to be canceled. So let me do that and move that right before edge ignoring save area. Now you're going to see that if you have fast fingers, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to try to scroll, which is another problem, and we will try to fix that as well. I know you're probably thinking, well, one problem leads to another and it never ends. Well, welcome to the fun of development. As long as you understand the techniques and why we're doing this, each problem has its own solution and it's rarely perfect. And to be able to solve these problems is what makes you valuable. So keep trying new things, have fun with it, and that's what will make you stand out. Now for the scroll view, what we need to do is to disable the scroll view using the same technique. Instead of doing that on a Z stack, we're gonna do that on the scroll view instead. In order to do that, we're gonna have to jump to the course view, and instead of state for is scrollable, we're gonna set it to a binding. A binding cannot have a default here, so we're going to set of type Boolean. Then when we call the course view component, we're going to have to fix the missing argument. So let's click on fix, put this on another line. For the binding, we're going to set self.$ is scrollable. We haven't created this state yet, so we're going to have to go to the top and create that state. So state var is scrollable is equal to false by default. Now we're going to find the scroll view. So this is the scroll view. Double click on the curly braces and let's put a new modifier at the end. So .disabled. We're going to set self.active, which is when the user taps on the card, and end, not self.is scrollable, question mark, true, otherwise false. Now, because of the course view component having a binding, and we're using it in a home as well, we're going to have to include it when we call the component. So let's fix it. So for is scrollable, let's set self.$ is scrollable. And we're missing this state, so we're going to go to the top and create that state. So state var is scrollable is equal to false. Great, we're going to go back to course list and resume the preview. So what you're going to see now is that both the scrolling and the interaction during that 0.7 second is not going to activate at all, which is exactly what we want to do. All right, so we're almost done. We just need to fix the rounded corners here. Let me switch to course detail. I'm going to need the screen size using the geometry reader. So I'm just going to set the variable bounds and receive the value from the parent. So var bounds of type geometry proxy. And then I'm going to set the default value for the preview. So let me do that. So for the preview, I'm going to set the bounds. Now, the problem that I have for the preview is that I don't have the bounds from anywhere. So what I can do here is to wrap the course detail inside a geometry reader. So let's do that. Geometry reader, right before course detail, curly braces, and I'm just going to move the course detail inside the curly braces. Let's not forget bounds in, and then we can put the value for bounds. Now using the bounds, we're going to scroll up a little bit to find screen.width, and we're going to use bounds instead to make it more adaptive. So bounds.size.width. For the rounded corners, we're going to make it adaptive for the iPad. So we're going to use get card corner radius, and we're going to put bounds as a value to send. We're going to jump back to course list, and we're going to go to course view, double click on the Z stack curly brace to go to the end. Where we're calling course detail, we're going to make sure to add the missing argument for bounds. So bounds, sending bounds. To set the rounded corners, we're going to add a new modifier after the background. So let's set dot clip shape, rounded rectangle, parentheses, and we're going to select corner radius with style. For the corner radius, we're going to set show question mark, which means if it's active. Get card corner radius by sending the bounds. After the parentheses, set colon for otherwise. We're going to set it to 30. For the style, we're going to set dot continuous. Great, so with this, we just want to make sure that only when we are in full screen mode that we can drag, and now there are rounded corners depending on the screen. So for example, if you test for the iPhone SE, you're going to see that because we don't have rounded corners, the card itself in the course detail is actually square, and when we drag, it's also square, adapting nicely. Let's check for the iPad. So I'm going to select iPad Pro 9.7 inch. The size class is not going to work here, only on the device, but there's just one tiny issue, which is the cover seems to be bigger in full screen, and that's pretty easy to fix by going to course detail. Instead of using a frame for max height, I'm going to use height instead, which means that I'm going to have to set it as its own frame modifier. So let me just cut the max height and the value and remove the comma, add another frame, so dot frame parentheses, paste the value, and instead of max height, I'm going to set it to height. Finally, let's see if everything works perfectly in the home. So we're going to go to home view. I'm going to click on play, and it does work. We're just missing that little disable scrolling. So let's add that as well. I'm going to scroll at the very top. Then I'm going to find the scroll view. Double click on the curly braces to find the end of the curly brace. Let's type dot disabled. we're going to set self.active and end not is scrollable, question mark true, otherwise false. Let's not forget the self. And if everything works perfectly, now you should not be able to scroll during that 0.7 second. And before we forget, I just want to change back the state of the login so that it's unlocked by default. Let me switch to home.swift, and from home.swift, I'm going to find avatar view, and I'm going to remove that exclamation point before user.isLogged. That's it. Why don't we test it on the iPad Pro 11-inch? So as you can see, the content is scrollable and you can switch back and forth, and it's not going to be interactive during that 0.7 second. It's also adaptive, which means that if we're using the Wallet UI or for the iPad, it's gonna work just great. Awesome. Now, if you feel ready to publish your app to the App Store, the next section is for you. I hope you enjoyed this session because it was extremely hard to put together, and I hope to see you in the next session. Hello, and welcome to the 60th and final session of my SwiftUI course. I hope you have found all the lessons up until now to be useful to a point where you want to publish your own app. First of all, it is important to look at the guide from Apple. They have the App Store guideline, which unless you're making a controversial app, it should be fine. And if you scroll down a little bit, Apple wants to make sure that you use Xcode 11 to build your app and Swift 5, which is what SwiftUI is using. And then, of course, you have to test on the latest devices, and more specifically, depending on which platform you're submitting for, either the Mac, iOS, watchOS, and tvOS. By the way, SwiftUI supports all of these platforms, so this is good to know. So we have a guide for each. So let's click on iOS and iPadOS. And here, if you scroll down a little bit, again, Xcode 11, optimized for iOS 13, as well as iPadOS if you choose to support the iPad. And if you do, definitely support multitasking, which includes slide over, split view. And then it is recommended to support dark mode. As we've learned, it's very easy to do it thanks to the assets catalog, as well as the system material sheets, which is the blur view. Now, Apple also has sign-in with Apple. This is only necessary if you are planning to use sign-in with Facebook or Google or any third-party sign-ins. But otherwise, if you're only using email and password, you should be fine. So let's scroll some more. Of course, test your app on devices, and then you're gonna have to submit your app for review, which typically takes a few days via the iTunes Connect. All right, so back to Xcode. Let's run the app on the iPad Pro 11-inch. In Xcode, you can disable the preview if you choose to. So you can go to the top right where it says Adjust Editor Options, click on it, and click on Canvas to uncheck it. And then you can resize Xcode to fully focus on the simulator. So as we've learned, testing on the simulator or on the device is always a better representation of what your users will experience. So in the late stage of app development, definitely do this as much as you can. First of all, I just want to make sure that the new changes and the new views that we have created works for dark mode. So let's click on Environment Overrides, enable the interface style, click on dark mode, and here we're going to test a few things, such as the card. And you see that we still have a white background somewhere that is not adaptive. So let's take a look at the other places, such as the content view. And that looks to be fine. Let's log off and check the login. So maybe we can change the white backgrounds for the form as well. So let's start with the card background. I'm gonna go to course list and I'm gonna jump to course view. And I'm gonna go towards the end of the Z stack. So double click on the curly brace. I'm gonna find the condition is scrollable And here where it says color white, I'm going to remove dot white and set parentheses with quotes inside, type background 1. Then we're going to go and fix the login view. So let me switch to login view. And here we're going to try to find the form. So you're going to find HTag with an image inside. And especially you're going to find the background modifier with a color white. We're going to do the same. Instead of dot white, color parentheses, quotes, background 1. Let's apply for the second icon background. Instead of color dot white, parentheses, quotes, background 1. If you run your app again and set to dark mode, you're going to see that our changes are great for the login screen, and then we can check the card and it's perfect. Next, I want to show you how to create your own launch screen. So we're going to open the project navigator, and at the very bottom of the list, you're going to find launch screen.storyboard. If you click on it, you're going to see the layout here. Let me maximize the window by double clicking on the toolbar. And because we're using storyboard, we're going to need a lot of real estate. First of all, I'm going to minimize the project navigator. Second, when you work with storyboard, make sure to have this enabled. So this little icon here, which enables the sort of layers list of your editor. Third, you're going to want to enable the inspector. So what is storyboard or interface builder? Well, this is a visual editor that has existed for more than a decade. Just like a design tool, it's really good for editing visual elements such as rectangles, text, backgrounds. But the problem is it becomes very overwhelming. It's not adaptive by default, and it's not very powerful because you still have to rely on code for creating interactions, animations, etc. This is strictly for static design. And if you want to go beyond the static design, you have to connect it to the code as an outlet, and then you have to code it. So you have to do a lot of switch back and forth between storyboard and the code editor, which can become really confusing to many people. Now for the launch screen, it's totally fine because we don't need to do anything much. And today I'm just going to give you a crash course to storyboard, and it's not going to go very deep. If you want to learn more, I have a course on storyboard and UI kit. I think it can be really useful, especially at the end of this course, if you want to deepen your knowledge of Swift, UI kit, storyboard, and iOS in general. So that being said, the only thing we're going to do today is a simple loading screen. And usually we're going to have something like this. It's a simple background with the app icon centered. So the first thing we can do is simply click on the background, which is white right now, and we can go to the attribute inspector. So here we have many tabs, and maybe you are on the first one, which is the file inspector, and there are many of them, but the most important ones are the attribute inspector and the size inspector. Let me go back to the attribute inspector, and here for the background, I'm going to change it to black color. Then for the app icon, I'm going to go to the assets catalog from the top menu and click on assets.exe assets. And I'm going to go to the assets folder to find the assets, then the app icon folder. I'm just going to drag and drop the icon.png. So right here. Now let me switch back, clicking on assets.exe assets and switch to launch screen.storyboard. I'm going to insert an image, and just like SwiftUI, you can insert elements by clicking on the plus sign. And here you have a bunch of objects, you have your images and colors. So I'm going to go to the objects, search for image, and drag and drop that to my interface builder. So with this in place, I have the options in the attributes inspector. I can also go to the size inspector to set a specific size. Just like in the design tool, I'm going to set 120 in terms of width, 120 in terms of height, and I can just drag to the center. We have these useful guides. So let me set my image. I'm going to go back to the attributes inspector, and for image, I'm going to type icon. there's an auto completion, so you can just select it and you can find the image updated here. So now we have to deal with constraints, and this is what a lot of people struggle with because storyboard is not adaptive by default. You have to set it after. The system that we're using is called auto layout, and the options are right here at the bottom right. We have the alignment and then constraints. So the constraints control the size and the positioning, and the alignment is for aligning with the container or with other elements. So in this case, we don't want the image to scale up or down depending on the size of the screen. So we're going to click on Add New Constraints, and we're going to set width to 120 and height to 120 always. So we're going to add these two constraints. Now Xcode is going to show us that we're missing constraints and it does not know the positioning of that image. So we're going to have to center it. We're going to click on Align, and then we're going to center horizontally and vertically in container. So that's basically it. Storyboard is really good for static image like this and alignment and drag and drop. But as you dig deeper and you have to deal with constraints and very complex layout, it can become really challenging compared to SwiftUI. So let's test this, Command R, and you're gonna see that the transition is pretty nice. And thanks to auto layout, the icon in the middle is always going to be 120 by 120, centered in the middle. So before we publish this to the App Store, we're gonna have to go to the Project Navigator and click on the project settings. Make sure to have the target selected and make sure to change your display name so that it fits nicely next to your app icon. And also for the bundle identifier, make sure that it's unique using a unique domain name in reverse and then the name of the app. For me, I'm just going to add SwiftUI at the end to make it more unique so that it doesn't conflict with my other apps. And as you develop your app, you're going to want to pay attention to the version and the build. So for the build is whenever you make small incremental change, and for the version is when you make major changes. Next, this is an important step, especially confusing for people who have never done this. You have to select your device to be either your iPhone or generic iOS device, and therefore when you click on product, you're going to be able to click on archive. And this step is going to take a few minutes or more depending on the size of your app. After it's done archiving, you're going to see this window where you have a list of your apps and the version list for each app. At this point, you can just click on Distribute, then App Store Connect, click on Next, Upload to the App Store Connect. Then you can click on Next again and automatically manage signing because this is very scary for a lot of people. So we're going to click on Next. And finally, we're going to generate the Apple distribution certificate. Then click on Next again. At the very end of this process, you should be able to see a screen like this and be able to upload it. Now this error is totally normal. That's because we have to create the app in the App Store Connect. So we're going to go to appstoreconnect.apple.com and it's going to ask you to log in. By the way, you're going to need to have a paid developer account if you want to publish it to the App Store. Once you're in, you're going to see a menu that looks like this. You're going to want to go to My Apps, and here you will want to create a new app by clicking on the plus sign. For the options, I'm going to select iOS. The name, I'm just going to set Design Plus Code, SwiftUI. For the language, I'm going to select English. For the bundle, you're going to find Xcode iOS wildcard. And the ID itself, remember, this is what we set up in the project. So this is what I have. And for the SKU, I'm going to just create a unique name like this one, Design Code SwiftUI. And then user access is going to be full access, and then create. Once you have created your app, you're going to see a screen like this where you can enter information. And on the left side, you're going to find the app version that you're about to submit. And this is necessary for submitting that archive to be uploaded from Xcode. All right, so let's repeat the steps again. At the end, I'm still getting another error. And it seems that somewhere I used a plus sign in my product name. So let me fix this. I'm going to go back to project settings, target, click on build settings. I'm going to search for the name with a plus. And here you can find in product name that I use a plus here, and that's not allowed. So I'm going to remove this and press enter, and then let's archive it again. So let's go to product, archive. And by the way, you're gonna need to archive every single time that you want to launch a new version or a new build. All right, so third try, hopefully this is going to be good. And boom, we have our app uploaded to App Store Connect. So now back to App Store Connect, we can go to activity, and this is where you're gonna find the build that you have just uploaded, and it says processing. This might take a day or more, but once it's approved, you can go back to App Store, prepare for submission, and you're gonna be able to go to build and find your upload right here. And while you do that, you should definitely upload the screenshots, set your promotional text, description, and once you're all done, you can click on submit for review and wait for Apple to review your app. And if it's all good, then you should be able to see your app in the App Store. So this is the end of my SwiftUI course. I hope you enjoyed all 60 sessions of it. This course took me a long time to put together. So if you think it's worth your time, please recommend it to your friends. If you want to see more SwiftUI courses, feel free to request, because I take all requests and I would love to create more courses for Apple Watch, macOS, Apple TV, and maybe even a part 4. Who knows? So thank you so much for following along this far. I'd love to see any app that you're building with the help of this course. Feel free to tweet at me, and I'll see you in the next course.